Welcome back to our podcast, People Just Like Us. And today I am absolutely delighted to have Cameron here with us. He's going to introduce himself in just a second. If this is something that you would like to do, that you have something to say and you would like to join us, then we would love to have you come onto our podcast. Please do just get in touch with us and we'll create a wee space in the new year for you. So, Cameron, it is lovely to have you with us.
Thank you, Sean.
Really glad that you were able to come. Why don't you kind of introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about yourself, first of all.
So, my name's Cameron Thomson, and I am the part owner and part founder of a leadership development business called VIA Leadership, between myself and my colleague Dr. Mark O'Gallan. VIA stands for Values into Action. But it's the Roman word or Latin word rather, for a journey between 2 points, which we felt rather nicely encompassed what leadership's about, because you're never quite there, you're just always on that journey. So Mark's a very experienced professional coach, as am I, so we launched this together a couple of years ago, and we work with individuals, coaching on a one-to-one basis. We work with our teams to help to develop their teams, and we also work in different organisations to help those organisations to develop their culture. And we've been doing it for about 15 years now, and I haven't worked a day in 15 years. So I love what I get to do.
So how did you land here then? Where did you come from?
So it was a bit of good luck, to be honest with you. So much of life is about moments, isn't it? And as we were talking before we started broadcasting, I actually used to be based in this building when it was a bank, but I had become roundly disenchanted with the world of banking. I moved into private equity investment for a couple of years, the first experience of which was great. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The second experience was the worst mistake I made in my professional life. But good comes from everything, and through that I met some people who had their own leadership development coaching business, and within having a couple of conversations with them, I was in my early 40s at the time, and I thought, I just get it. I really get it. They showed a lot of faith in me in the early days, and while we're not together anymore, we're still in very good terms. And you know, I went ahead, I got my coaching qualifications, and I haven't looked back since. And there was a moment, we talk a lot when we're talking with organisations about connection to purpose. You know, what is it that gives you a sense of fulfilment? The times of day when you would do it for nothing. You might not tell the boss you would do it for nothing, but you would do it for nothing. And I had a moment quite early in my coaching career. I was working with a professional services firm through in Edinburgh, and one of the guys he was having a very difficult situation with one of his team members, and just I can also remember it was almost like a kind of JFK moment. It was an Edinburgh bypass, and I thought, hang on a minute, I think I just might know what might be going on here. I was able to relate what he was experiencing to one of my sons. And phoned him. I said, look, he was in an open office environment. I said, go and get yourself into a room. I think we need to have a further chat. And long story short, there's a young man now who doesn't know that I exist. We've never met, but he still has his career, and there's an organisation that's flourishing because they're thinking a wee bit differently about how they manage that young man. And I'm proud of that. And I think that was the moment. I think I've learned over the years that something always explains something. That might sound quite trite to say that, but I think if I experience something, I think, well, why did she want to make that decision or do it that way? Something explains it, and it's just about understanding how we're wired. And we're the only person that's seen the world through your eyes is you. The only person that's seen the world through my eyes is me. And if we can build our appreciation of how other people are wired, then I think it makes for a far more pleasant environment. And nobody gets out of their bed in the morning to make a bad decision. Nobody gets out of their bed in the morning to have a bad day. Sometimes it works out that way, but it's not typically why we show up. So I just love getting to work with individuals who maybe, just, at the end of the day, I'm a professional question asker. That's all I do for a living, I just ask questions. And I love it when we get those moments where there's maybe a pause moment. Maybe the ceiling becomes awfully interesting, or the floor tile becomes off, and we've maybe just asked something that has just unblocked something inside the person, and those moments are worth much gold. Or maybe you get a little text message at night from somebody that says, I tried that, or experimented with that and it worked. And only myself and that person will know what that means. But it's usually something tricky.
But it sounds like it's...
And I get a lot of pleasure from that. I get a lot of fulfilment from that.
It is just that connections thing, isn't it? It's making connections for you, but also helping other people to make those connections as well.
Hopefully, yeah. And ultimately, the aim of coaching, I believe, is to make the person self-sustainable. And I've had clients say to me, and this sounds a bit immodest, and I don't mean it to be, but they'll sometimes say, they're maybe in a situation, they'll say, what would Cameron ask me? Which I kind of take, I think that's quite cool actually, that they do. That makes me chuckle when they do that, because they're then starting to coach themselves through things and maybe raise that sense of self-awareness in them. And I just I love those moments, and maybe you haven't seen them for a few years and you bump into them in the supermarket or something like that, and there's a warmth there, and you kind of know that you've helped them through a tricky time. And
I think that professional questioner thing is a really interesting one. So I didn't realise I did it until quite recently when somebody pointed it out to me. I wonder all the time. So I start sentences all the time with, I wonder what it would be like if, or I wonder what might happen if. And so you actually just paint a picture of an alternative for somebody. You just wonder about it. So I suppose I'll just use my own stock phrase then. So I wonder then what your experience, obviously we're a mental health organisation, improving people's mental health, looking at their emotional well-being. So what's your experience then round about that? Because there must be a bit of an intersection between what you do now and kind of mental and emotional health.
Very much so, and a large area that I concentrate on my work with organisations in particular is, what are the types of things that organisations can do to create an environment, what I would call psychological safety. Now, there will be somebody that goes around this building to make sure that the plugs are wired properly and there's not any debris lying on the floors or stuff like that people are going to injure themselves on. That's the health and safety person. I think the most important thing that we can do as leaders is to create an environment where people feel psychologically safe. Now, the other side of that coin, of course, is we don't want people to be complacent, so we want to guard against that. But I strongly believe that human performance comes from a place of being psychologically safe. There's 50,000 years of evolution that's gone into this up here, and if we went back to Paleolithic man, the only way I could get to sleep at night, when we lived in the tribe, was I knew you were manning the barricades and the saber-toothed tigers weren't going to get me. And then I would get up and I would man the barricades and you'd get asleep. And there's some really interesting studies now between human beings and canines and equines, because within the animal kingdom we're all species that are preyed upon. We're not creatures of prey ourselves, and you would know, you could sit on a horse and it'll trot and it'll jump and it'll gallop, and I'll look at it and I'll say, right, come on, giddy up, and it'll just look up at me and say, I don't think so, because it doesn't sense safety. So I think it's incumbent or desirable to create an environment where people can feel safe. I used to do a work with a very senior soldier in the British Army, and I said to him one day, I said, what did he think? He'd led his regiment in some pretty difficult places, and I said to him, what did he think his most outstanding achievement as a leader had been? And he had a lovely answer, Shona, because he said, well, first of all, this would be for others to say rather than for me to claim. But he said, I think I created an environment where my guys would just tell me what was really happening. I recognised early in my career that bullets don't understand rank. And a bullet doesn't know whether it's hitting a corporal or a private or a sergeant or a major general, it just hits you. So to create that environment where people can, tell you the unvarnished truth without any sense of retribution or I'm going to carry the mark of Cain around about that. And I often actually say to the leaders that I work with, just to silently have a look around the team that they've got around them, and just ask them. I think it's sometimes perhaps the best question they can ask themselves is, which one of these people can afford to tell me the truth? Because almost every one of them has got next month's car payment or mortgage payment or care home payment or school payment riding on their relationship with you, you know, and it's up to you to create that environment where they get. And so I think to create that place of mental safety, and one of the things I'm seeing with organisations more commonly now on a broader level is that they're absolutely starting to adopt an approach around people's well-being as part of just their core offering. Now that might be things like their financial well-being or their mental well-being or their physical well-being or their social well-being, but they're starting to embed this into their cultures, and that's when I started working life in 1984, that did not exist. I think that's a huge step forward. We've still got a long way to go, but I think that's a huge step forward.
So this might be a bit of a contentious question then, just coming up for me in the midst of what you just said there. So organisations that want to do that, what do you think the percentage of organisations is that actually want to do that, and the percentage that want to be seen to be doing that because it ticks a box somewhere?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I guess what you're talking about is the sincerity behind it.
Organisations that because to do all of that, there has to sometimes be a whole systemic change that needs to happen within your organisation, and not just procedural changes, but actually attitude changes, and also sometimes in your senior team there needs to be a psychological awareness in your senior team before they can create a psychological awareness in the organisation.
And I think there's many factors at play there, and I will come back to answer your question. I mean, I think it's probably less than half at the moment, perhaps across the board. I think there are many out there who are ticking a box because it's the flavour of the month at the moment, but they don't necessarily have their emotional weight behind it. Almost exclusively, my client base are privately owned. So I'm not dealing with, I do deal with one or two public sector organisations, but broadly speaking, it's privately owned businesses that I'm dealing with, so I can get a better temperature check on the sincerity behind what they're trying to do. And actually, one of the most powerful tools that we can use to help to embed this type of knowledge is actually to have the senior management model it themselves and talk about their own experiences and perhaps where they've had challenges themselves. So I would say that I'm fortunate with the organisations I deal with. I would say it's most of them, but I realise that's not the case necessarily across the board. But I do believe, I think in many regards we're maybe trying to turn around a super tanker. It doesn't stop on a dime and just turn around quickly. But I think there's a momentum around this now, and I think as more and more people enter the workplace, whether it be private sector or public sector, I think to have that a willingness where people are willing to make themselves vulnerable, which I think is one of the I really think it's the platform through which actually teams grow. That willingness to sit in front of you and tell you something that I know you could hurt me with, but I don't believe you will. I think that there's traction and momentum around that, and I'm seeing that in many different areas of what I do. A big area that's certainly become far more prevalent in the last 6 to 12 months, for instance, are discussions around the menopause in the workplace. And I can tell you, when I started my working life 30 odd years ago, that was not being talked about, and the vulnerabilities associated with that. And I just did a compelling session with a client about 3 weeks ago up in Perth, and you could have heard a pin drop as a couple of the ladies were prepared to talk about their experiences and the number of questions they got from their male colleagues, etc. So that's just one example of that client gets it. Now, I know the previous management structure of that business. I'm not so confident 5 or 6 years ago that conversation would have taken place, but it's taking place now. And actually, it was really helpful right at the outset that the managing partner put his hand up to a room full of his guys and said, I'm really nervous about this. But I think there's a huge education piece to be done around that.
There is also something in there about your senior team being able to own stuff themselves and being able to be reflective themselves and being able to have the courage to be vulnerable with folks themselves. That whole vulnerability thing is just fascinating. I mean, it's one of the values here in Healing for the Heart. And I remember reading a number of years ago that in terms of the interview process, if you're interviewing for a new post, the questions in interview should reflect your values, because actually it's much easier to teach people skills than it is to teach them, values or character or anything else.
Yeah.
And so we consciously in our interview procedure ask a question that allows the prospective employee to be able to talk about their vulnerabilities.
Do you know, it's really interesting you should say that. I was sitting with a leader earlier this week, and we got onto that very subject. And you're right, because typically organisations hire for skills and fire for behaviours. So if we can get the behaviours, we're not. It's not a guarantee of success, but you're starting to load the deck in your favour a little bit. And they've, as you see in many, many places, they've got the kind of organisational values on the wall. But truthfully, they've been there that long, they're just part of the furniture. And we were talking about it, and I said, the way to actually bring these to life is to have the conversations around them.
That's right.
To be talking about when we've lived them, but actually, and this is the vulnerable piece, to be willing to talk about when we've not lived them.
That's right.
When maybe I did let you down, or I let that client down, or I didn't deal with that supplier in the manner that's congruent with the way that we say we do things. Now that takes a bit of time. I've done it with a client recently, and truthfully it took about 2 years to actually get the senior team to be prepared to sit in front of one another and say, I kind of let us down a bit here. But now that they're doing it, I promise they're flying. And there's another little exercise actually that I have them do around these things, whatever they might choose to be, is just to say to them, look, go into Google Images and pick off an image of what that should. I think maybe one was collaboration, one was vulnerability, one was, trust, whatever it might be. And just go and pick me off an image that represents that. And come and talk to me. It's actually not about the image, it's about your ability to talk to it. Because by being able to talk to it, I'll be able to sense something visceral will happen between us that'll let me sense, right, does she want to get it or does she not? So.
And I think it's that soft stuff, isn't it, that comes around the measurable or the quantifiable data that you would measure from a business or from an organisation in terms of their outputs or their outcomes. But there's also something else there that our funders or our investors or whatever often don't ask about and often don't measure, but actually it's really important for the health of the organisation, all that soft stuff that goes round about
and
it.
It's a bit of a foible of mine. When people use that word soft, I often say to them, look, please don't confuse soft with easy.
That's right.
Because often the stuff that's characterised as soft, if I'm having to tell you that you don't behave in a way that's congruent with the way that we do stuff, that's typically not a soft conversation. Right. And so I think we want to be able to recognise that it's not always easy, but it's absolutely important, for us to be able to understand. It's, if organisations aren't clear on this stuff, how do I know I want to bring my talent there?
That's right.
And often in fact, this happened with a client not so long ago, when they're talking about engaging somebody like me, and you're typically dealing with the CEO or the MD or what have you, and they'll say, right, so how, this is lovely, Cameron, and I think this is marvellous, let's do this, but how am I going to measure this? How am I going to, what's my return on capital going to be? And some of it can be quite hard to put into pounds, shillings and pence, but maybe that resolving door you've got at the front starts to slow down a bit.
That's right.
Because you're not losing talent.
That's right.
The way that you were, maybe you start spending less money with recruiters because your guys are staying. One of my clients, we were extremely proud of this, it just emerged a couple of months ago. We were doing a conference for them, and they've got about 130 staff, give or take, and we realised that in the last 2 years they've had 12 members of staff who have introduced another family member or a very close friend to the business. So if you're willing to let your nearest and dearest go and work in a place, my son interned for them over the summertime. Now, I quite like him, my son. In fact, there's some days I love him, but to actually be prepared to say, I'm going to let him, I'd like him to come here for 3 or 4 months, over the summertime and gain some experience. And so, there's not a line for that on the balance sheet, but don't tell me it's not important, because when it goes a bit south, the balance sheet doesn't save you. It's the people that saves you.
That's right. That's right, and I think that's really important almost to put a pin in that and say that it is the people, and that would be one of the other things that we would talk about here, that it's the people that matter most. Even what you're saying there, years ago I was in education, and I remember at that time, and actually still with friends who are teachers, when their kids or folks younger will say, I think I might want to go into teaching, and the first thing that usually comes out of their mouth is, don't do that, you absolutely don't want to be a teacher, don't come into this, it's just not. And you think, goodness me, that's not really an advert for a profession,
exactly.
Is it?
My parents so both my parents were in education. My father was a lecturer, my mum was a secretary in a college, and both of them said, you do what you want, Cam, but don't go into education. My boys, well, they're young men now, and my background was in banking, and I would say, you can do what you want, but I really don't want you to get into the banking environment, so to actually be able to go to somebody that you love and say, I'd be quite happy for you to do this.
So there's a question that we ask every single podcast guest that comes on here, and the responses that we've had over the last year have been fascinating, so no pressure or anything.
Okay, so if it's rotten, it's down to me, is that what you're saying?
So if you had a magic wand or some fairy dust that you could sprinkle, that you could change one thing in our society and culture that would have a huge positive impact on mental and emotional health, what is it you would change?
Am I allowed more than one thing?
That's often a question we get asked as well, so yes, but prioritise.
Okay, so prioritising, I think educate around it. I was talking with my youngest son about this the other night, and he's just left school, he's just started university, and I was just asking him about, what type of support they get at, what sort of exposure rather they get at school around this, and it really didn't seem sufficient, and similarly, at university there's some stuff there, but there's not a great enough awareness of it. So I think, look, it's the old Tony Blair line, isn't it? Educate, educate and educate. I really think that there's a piece around that. I think there's another piece, so if you don't mind me going on as well, it's for employers to, I'm a great believer that we get the behaviours that we reward. Therefore, we need to build something into people's remuneration style of packages and their appraisal of performances, etc., around a recognition that as employers we value your mental well-being, and we want you to be doing the things that are congruent with managing your mental well-being. I had a brilliant interview a few days ago with Max Whitlock, the British gymnast, and obviously there's been some cultural issues at British Gymnastics, as we all know, and one of the questions he was being asked by the interviewer was along the lines of, so how many hours a week were you expected to spend in the gym, Max? And I think the answer was 40 hours a week in the gym, and the question then was, and how many hours a week were you expected to work with a psychologist? 0. So, the point being, well, maybe if it had been 35 hours a week in the gym and 5 hours a week in the, with a psychologist, well, maybe there's a start towards an employer recognising the importance of this. And again, I heard something, I wish I could remember the fellow's name, but the fellow who's in charge of the academy at Manchester United, and he was talking about taking the parents aside and talking to the parents of the boys or the girls that are trying to make a career in professional football, and saying, like, clearly to get to the top they need to be single-minded, they need to be focused, they need to become a wee bit, might seem selfish in many regards, all the things I'm going to trying to embed in your child to make them a success is likely to give them mental well-being issues in later life. Are you okay with this? And then start to build a programme around how do we protect that side of the people. So I do think there's a piece for employers to recognise that not only get a responsibility but a desire to look after people's mental well-being, because if we look after that, we'll get it back. So I think there's education, and I think there's how we incentivise people.
And that really is about investment, and it's also about perhaps tweaking or changing the priorities within the systems or the procedures that we have, the processes that we have operating. So kind of flipping back to where we were in the conversation, just as we're kind of coming to an end, but that stuff you said earlier on, the companies that are contacting you are the companies that are invested in what they're doing, and also for us, the companies that are contacting us about employee assistance programs or support for their staff, they're the ones that are really invested in it. And I suppose part of our hope for doing these kind of podcasts is that we start to raise that awareness amongst people who haven't yet thought of that.
And for me, I mean, it's great that you raised that, because when I'm out talking at lunches or dinners or stuff like that, I'm not talking about some type of utopian vision.
That's right.
That when I close my eyes, this is what I have a dream. Although I guess my dream is a coach in every boardroom. That's what we've said since day one in our business. But this is happening, and I can cite examples from several different industries of this is not a figment of my imagination. This is what has put food on my table for the last 15 years. To be doing this, and I think there is a momentum around this, and people do start to get in touch and say, okay, that's actually quite interesting, and can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because I do believe, for a myriad of reasons that we don't need to go into today, that the momentum in this is only going in one direction. We're not going to sit here in 5 years' time and this is going to have diminished. And I am super confident of that. It's only going in one direction. Yep.
Fabulous. So if people want to get in touch with you, we will put your contact details on wherever our podcasts are going out, so we'll have that there if folk can get in touch with you. Businesses, individuals as well, presumably.
Absolutely.
If they're looking for individual coaching, and if folks are looking to get in touch in terms of employee assistance stuff, then we're really happy to hear from them too.
Delighted.
Thank you so much for coming in. Obviously, we are now starting to work with you now too. So maybe in months to come, we'll have you back on and we'll have a chat about your involvement with us and what has happened in terms of healing for the heart. Meantime, if you've been listening or watching this and you are thinking that this is a space for you, then please do get in touch. We would love to promote what you do. We'd love to hear how mental health and well-being is affecting your business and what you're doing about it. So if that's something you want to do, please join us on one of our future podcasts and be somebody that's just like us, that comes and joins us and has a blether. Thanks a lot for tuning in.